Nothing in this podcast or on our website should be construed as medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for your individual nutritional and medical needs. The information presented is based on our research and is strictly that of the author and not necessarily those of any professional group or other individual.
Hi, I'm Sue Becker from Bread Beckers. Welcome to Sue's Healthy Minutes. I'm so excited you've joined me today, and I hope this episode encourages you and allows you to find the answers you have been praying for the health of you and your family. Today on Sue's Healthy Minutes, I will share part 2 of my interview with Chelsea Blackbird, the Christian Nutritionist. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the club. How are you today? We are continuing our discussion about the benefits of eating real wheat with Sue Becker. This is the first time I've ever done a 2-part podcast, but there's just so much to talk about. And I know that you really enjoyed part 1 and are probably just hanging on a thread, waiting for the rest of our discussion. So we will jump right back into it. We kind of left off last week with the history of the milling and what we're missing from modern processed wheat and bread. And so we're just going to continue that discussion here. So Sue, it's just so fascinating to me because all of these things that you said that wheat is helpful for is what we've heard wheat is causing us issue digestively, mentally, skin. I mean, every single thing that you said wheat is good for. Literally, you can open a book here on podcasts and in the holistic health world, and say that, you know, it is the absolute opposite. So I'm just going to let you jump off and start from there.
I'm so glad to be here with you today. And that's exactly what I saw was the information I was reading was becoming very puzzling to me because every health issue that people were saying were being caused by wheat, we had actually seen healed by people making their own bread from freshly milled wheat. They were now eating more wheat than they ever had, more bread than they ever had, and they were making bread the mainstay of their diet. So this caused me to go, all right, there's got to be something else here. You know, we've seen bowel issues resolved, cholesterol, resolved, blood sugar resolved, skin issues resolved. So what is going on here? So I began to study and really combat the myths that were out there. I have to know the truth, and I have to know that I'm teaching the truth. And so the first myth that I realized I needed to bust was that wheat is not genetically modified in this country. There is no commercially grown, sold wheat that is genetically modified in America. In fact, farmers really resist the whole introduction of genetically modified wheat. Now, yes, the powers that be have developed some genetically modified seeds. Testing was done. It was stopped in 2005, and permission was never granted to grow it commercially. So that is a myth. The other myth is what gluten really is. Gluten is not in grains. It is something that is formed by grains, and it's been there since the beginning of time. And that's what we need to realize. Wheat is the only family of grains. And when I say wheat, the wheat family, that's wheat, our traditional wheat, rye, spelt, kamut, barley. Those are all in the wheat family. It is the only family of grains that has a unique sequence of proteins in the endosperm, the white flour portion, that when you wet those proteins, when you hydrate that flour, a stretchy substance known as gluten forms. Gluten is very important. The formation of this gluten is very important for the production of yeast leavened breads, whether that's commercial yeast, which is a single organism of yeast, or it's a sourdough starter that's your lactic acid bacteria and your yeast organisms combined. Either one, gluten is invaluable. It's necessary for these breads to rise, because what happens is when the yeast feeds on the carbohydrates in the dough or in the grain, a byproduct of that feeding process is carbon dioxide gas. These stretchy strands of gluten trap that carbon dioxide, and that's what enables the yeast bread to rise. So since the beginning of time, wheat is the chosen grain to make yeast or sourdough leavened breads. It's just the way it is, and all of this about wheat being genetically modified, so now that it has more gluten than it used to, that's just a misnomer. Yes, wheat is not genetically modified. I want to stress that again. Yes, it has been hybridized to have better growing aspects and things like that. But Dr. Kursada, he is the scientist for the USDA. He tested the protein content in over 100 years of seeds of wheat and found that there was no significant difference in the protein content or the content of those gluten-forming proteins. So that's something that we need to understand. And what affects protein content in wheat and other grains, for that matter, more than anything, is rainfall during the growing season. So this is just misinformation that's just not correct. So what is the problem? Well, when you strip away the bran and germ with all the vitamins, all the minerals, and all the fiber, and you eat the commercially processed white bread out there, it is those gluten-forming proteins and starch. And that's what causes the bowel issues, the constipation, the irritable bowel, the stomach aches from eating the bread. So that's some information that people need to realize. And I think that's why when people say, oh, I went gluten-free and I feel so much better. Well, yeah, you quit eating the commercially processed bread. And the other thing is that 100% whole grain bread that I talked about, commercially processed 100% whole grain bread that I mentioned in our last episode, is if you look at the label, and this is what I point out to people, the third or fourth ingredient of that 100% whole grain bread is gluten flour. Well, gluten, the food industry does not consider it flour, even though it is the isolated proteins of the white flour that form gluten. So now they've added massive amounts of pure gluten-forming protein flour to that 100% whole grain bread, and that's causing issues. God never intended us to eat the endosperm, the white flour, without the bran and the germ and the oils and all the vitamins, nutrients, and enzymes to help us break it down. And again, the missing fiber is the key. I just did an interview for my podcast, Sue's Healthy Minutes, of a man that said he had significant stomach and bowel issues. He said, my number one important information that I had to find out when I go on a construction job is where the bathrooms were. He was a superintendent over these. And he said he would eat bread from the store and he would double over with cramps. And he just started milling in December, milling his own grains. And he said, for 3 days after I found you and found out about this, I ate nothing but this bread, and he said, it changed my life. And my employee, when he was telling her, she said, well, so did it help you? And he goes, no, this bread didn't help me. It fixed it. It fixed the problem that no gastroenterologist had ever been able to fix for 10 years or more, and struggled with pain. And we hear this regularly. So I want to encourage people to do some digging and do some research for yourself. Now, there is true celiac disease. That is real. Less than 1% of Americans have true genetic celiac disease. It's a genetic disease. You're born with it, and you will never be able to eat wheat, whether it's freshly milled or not, because you cannot digest the amino acid components in wheat, gliadin and glutenin, particularly the gliadin. And those are the gluten-forming proteins. You can't digest gliadin. You're genetically born that way, and freshly milled flour is not your friend, and you can't do it. But what is being diagnosed as celiac disease today is not true genetic celiac disease. You have all the symptoms, but it's not true genetic celiac disease. So just like this man, or this, I'll tell you another story, this young girl doubled over in pain every time she ate bread or anything with gluten in it, anything made from wheat. My son had a bakery at the time. We no longer have the bakery, but he made a gluten-free bread, and it was the best gluten-free bread that I've ever tasted. But, the little girl, she was 12 years old. She just wanted a soft bread to make a sandwich. My son explained to her exactly what I've explained to you today. And he said, if she's not a true celiac, she may be able to tolerate, and eat this bread. And the mother said, she just wants a sandwich. And she said, I'm going to try it. But she said, if she even gets any gluten, which that's what she thought, gluten, she doubles over in pain. She throws up. It's horrible. Well, my son sold the bread at a farmer's market, and that's where he met the mom and the little girl. And he did it every Saturday. The mom bought the bread. The little girl came running up to my son's booth at the farmer's market the very next week. Mr. Dave, I love your bread. I had a sandwich every day, and I had no stomach ache and no throwing up. I love your bread. And from that day on until he closed the bakery, that young girl stood behind his booth with him and sold his bread for him and told her story. So I just want to encourage people. I hope this encourages you to know if you're not a true genetic celiac, then chances are some of your issues may be the commercially processed bread that's in our stores, and that you may be able to find great relief when you begin to mill your own grains, even wheat. We have heard hundreds of testimonies in the last 10 years, not just people saying they can tolerate the wheat and this bread, but that it resolves health issues that they were seeing that they thought that were attributed to gluten. And that was not the case. So genetic celiac disease, like I said, is serious. You will never be able to eat the wheat, but you're born with it. You're typically diagnosed by the time you're 7 years old, 7 to 10, somewhere in there. And it causes debilitating problems. But what is being diagnosed as celiac or even a gluten sensitivity? I question that. And I question that not to be arrogant or anything like that, but to tell people there is hope for you. You don't have to be on this restrictive a diet, and not only could you maybe enjoy bread, but you might see your health issues resolved, just like this elderly gentleman. And I typically ask people, have you always had a problem with eating bread since you were very young? And if the answer is no, if the answer is this started in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, then chances are you're not a genetic celiac, and milling your whole grain and making your bread may be the best thing you could ever do for you and your family.
Wow. I've never heard it put like that it's possibly people are being, would you say, misdiagnosed as celiac when they're not?
Yeah, they have the symptoms. If you're a celiac, and if you can't digest a protein, what's going to happen there is when it gets to through your digestive system, it lays down the villi in your gut, which causes the leaky gut, which causes the irritable bowel syndrome, which causes the chronic diarrhea, bleeding bowels. These are all symptoms of this. Well, a true celiac, that's usually what initiates, hey, something's wrong. I've got these debilitating issues, and they test for it. And the thing is, when I was growing up, you never heard of celiac disease. And now they're more informed and they're testing for it. So that's why we're seeing it more and more. But in that 30-year-old that's eaten bread all their life and never had these debilitating issues, but now they have the same symptoms. So much of our medical diagnoses are based on symptoms, and I understand that. They scope them and they say, yeah, your villi is laid down, you got all this irritation in your gut. So they're diagnosed with celiac disease because it's the same symptoms, but it's not true genetic celiac disease. And after several years of studying this and going, what is going on here? I finally came across an article, and I think I have the link for it. I don't know. I'll have to try to find it, but it was called Reversing Non-Genetic Celiac Disease. And that was like, yes, this is it. Non-genetic celiac disease can be reversed with, guess what? Whole grains, and probiotics to clean up the villi, to clean up the mess. So this is just exciting to me. Years ago, I had testimony of a lady. I used to say she was an elderly lady, and because her daughter was the customer of ours, but now I'm the age of that elderly lady. So that young lady, this girl's mother, had debilitating issues, bleeding bowels, severe irritation, severe chronic diarrhea, could not leave her house, could not, and she was 65 years old, could not sleep through the night, would get up in the night 5 times to go to the bathroom. Again, kind of like the man that I just interviewed, had to know where bathrooms were, but really had become homebound because she couldn't leave her home. So this customer of ours, a young girl, her and her husband were missionaries. They were here on furlough, and she was going to visit her mom, and she came in the store and she said, this is horrible. My mom is bleeding bowels. She's been on steroids for 10 years. You're not supposed to be on steroids that long. And they've tried to take her off, but she has, just has these horrible flare-ups and bleeding bowels. And so they told her that maybe she should go gluten-free. This was kind of the beginning of the gluten-free craze. She said, my mom's on limited income. We're missionaries. And I said, listen, our ministry will help you. We'll get your mom a meal and some grain. And if she said, we're going to visit, so we'll take it to her and I'll teach my mom how to do this. So she first was like, well, they've told her to go gluten-free. But then the more we talked, she goes, I don't know how to do gluten-free. Let's just give me a bucket of red wheat. I just want some hard red wheat. I'm just going to make bread out of that. So she takes the wheat and the mill to her mom and stays with them for 2 weeks. She wrote me to say that in 5 days, her mom was sleeping through the night. By the end of the 2 weeks, everything was reversed. Her mom no longer had bleeding bowels. Her mom no longer had chronic diarrhea. Her mom had her life back. Her mom and her dad were out working in the yard. They could now go wherever they wanted to do and do whatever they wanted to do. So I hope this encourages people to know that it could be the answer, not the cause. Another mom heard me share on what gluten actually is, and they had put her son on gluten-free diet, and he was on all kinds of medications, a young boy. And she said, I heard you explain what gluten is. And so I bought a mill and started milling my grain. And not only did it correct those issues, but he's now off of all of his medication. And the same with this older gentleman that I just interviewed. He goes, my cholesterol dropped, my blood pressure's corrected. I'm on no medication, and yet I was on all this stuff. So that is my heart, not to debunk and prove that I'm wrong and just say, "Burr, you're probably not celiac," but to give you hope and encouragement that you could reverse all of this.
Yeah. So it sounds like, it's not necessarily that when wheat was hybridized, the gluten protein is bigger or more pronounced. It's that the processing of it almost makes it like and the addition of it sounds like in the breads, it's like a naked gluten almost, where you've just got like this gluten and starch without all of the other protective things around it. And that is what is making it so much more pronounced for people. Would that be kind of an accurate way to describe it?
That is. Let me explain something about digestion. During digestion, carbohydrate digestion begins in your mouth. When you chew your food, your saliva contains an enzyme called amylase, and it very quickly begins to break down the carbohydrates in your food. And that's why if you chew your food longer, it'll start tasting sweeter. So you want to chew your food because carbohydrate digestion begins there. When you swallow that food and it goes into your stomach, that is where carbohydrate digestion virtually ends. Protein digestion begins. Protein digestion needs an acid environment. So we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Our stomach lining has these cells that produce acid to enable the protein digestive enzymes to work. It also, because we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and God knew what he was doing, we have these cells that produce mucus to protect our stomach lining from this production of acid. So protein digestion can take place in the stomach, and these protein digestive enzymes can work. And then so once this is all churned up in our stomach, the chyme, as it's called, passes through out of the stomach into the small intestines, where then enzymes from the pancreas and other digestive enzymes are mixed with our food. where carbohydrate and fat digestion continues and then gets dumped into the large intestine, the remains to be eliminated through our bowel. But here's the point I want to make. Do you know what the number one medication taken in America today is? One of the number one, I shouldn't say the number one. It's antacids.
Yeah, an acid blocker.
Exactly. So, yeah. So could perhaps there be another instigator in this whole issue of not being able to break down proteins? I want to read a quote, if I can, from a well-known doctor. I like some of what he says, but I want to read this to you, and I want you to see the wrong conclusions that we are being given to the information that's presented. So listen carefully, and y'all are intelligent listeners, I know. So listen carefully to this. Okay, so this is a quote. Damage to the gastrointestinal tract from the overuse of antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs like Advil or Aleve. How many people live on those? And acid-blocking drugs like Prilosec or Nexium, combined with our low-fiber and high-sugar diet, leads to the development of celiac disease and gluten intolerance or sensitivity and the resultant inflammation. All right, did everybody catch that? I absolutely agree. This is the problem. This is the cause. Listen to the conclusion. That is why the elimination of gluten can be a powerful way to prevent and reverse this and many other chronic diseases. The biggest problem is wheat. I did not hear wheat anywhere in that lineup of what causes this issue. We've got to understand that allergic foods they cause the symptom, not the problem. Antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs like Advil and Aleve, how popular are those that we're taking that are destroying our gut lining? Acid blocking drugs, I just explained that to you, combined with our low fiber. The bread that's out there in the store has been stripped of the fiber and all the nutrients by taking away the bran and germ. If you buy whole grain and some are put back, okay. But then most of them are filled with sugar, right? This leads to the development of celiac disease. This doctor says this. Nowhere does he say that wheat caused the problem. So that's what I want to encourage people. So what's the answer? Freshly grind your whole grains so that you don't have to take so many antibiotics. You know, our family, 25 years, raising 9 children. We went to a doctor's 3 times. 1 was an ingrown toenail. Won't do that again. 2 were sickness that required antibiotics. 25 years of raising 9 children. That's huge. So the use of antibiotics, we need to try to get that eliminated or at least down to a minimum. And like I already stated, these acid-blocking drugs like Prilosec and Nexium, they're causing problems with our digestive system. And a true allergy, the definition of a true allergy is the inability to digest a protein component, if it's a food allergy, a protein component of that food. An intolerance can be something else, like sugar, like a lactose intolerance, something like that. But a true allergy, why are there so many allergies in America? Now, I've got lots of thoughts in my mind of why there are so many. But I go to Haiti, one of the poorest countries in the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. We've helped start a bakery there. We're feeding 800 to 1,200 kids a day, freshly milled bread. No one ever asked us if it was gluten-free. We smother it with peanut butter. No one says they have a peanut allergy. I mean, these are things we need to think about. What is happening in this country that's causing the problem? And I'm telling you, the food causes the symptom, not necessarily the problem, if it's real food. Do you understand what I'm saying? So wheat may cause a reaction, but it didn't cause the problem. I mean, did you hear that? Antibiotics, Prilosec, Nexium, Advil, Aleve cause these issues. Then why is the biggest problem wheat, the major source of gluten? That didn't cause the problem.
No, it's I think that, and I've talked to my audience a lot here, that, oftentimes it's not the food, it's the engine of the body that needs help. And if we don't have enough stomach acid, if we don't have the digestive enzymes, if our gut bacteria has been compromised, and whose hasn't in this day and age, all of those things compromise the engine of our body's ability to process food. And I think you're right. And that was part of what made me question and made me open to, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm like, I have done a lot of gut work over the years. I have worked at this. I have, increased my stomach acid. I have, worked on my digestive enzyme. I have worked on, my gut bacteria. And I think that's so much of, the gut bacteria is so much of what is at play here. And that everyone's, with all the antibiotics and everything that you talked about, our body's just so compromised. It's hard to digest these things. And so, 20 years ago, no, I didn't have any of those things in place. My gut was an absolute wreck. And so was my mom's. I've told people here, like, I just thought that this was our cross to bear. Like, on my mom's side of the family, nobody poops. It's like, just total digestive mayhem. And then on my dad's side of the family, there's a genetic skin condition. And I was, which, by the way, doctors told me they couldn't do anything about, and that I, reversed by eating, real food, changing my diet. But, I always thought, I'm just, that's just our lot. We're just people that, can't poop and have bad skin, and that's all there is to it, until I found that changing your diet can make all the difference. And so I think that is really important for people to consider, is that once you've really, taken care of your gut, and maybe this is part of it. I mean, it's so funny to sit here and say, okay, instead of going gluten-free, do the 100% opposite and eat wheat bread, mill your own wheat and make this bread. And that could be the answer. I mean, people are going to be like, okay, here we go. Once again, there's all this conflicting, advice, but I think we have to, take all these things into context.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I heard popular doctor that actually I think started the whole gluten-free anti-grain propaganda that's out there. I heard him on, the educational channel, and he said that wheat is the most toxic poison that we're putting in our mouth. And I'm like, what? And I think it saddens me that people can't differentiate between wheat, the real whole grain that I pick up out of my bucket and mill into flour, and the stuff that's in the store. That's not, it's made from wheat, but that's not wheat. That's not at all the same thing. And in truth, one of the things that's out there is that obesity, began to rise in direct correlation with our consumption of wheat. The more and more wheat we eat, the fatter we've gotten. Well, I hate to tell you, our wheat consumption's actually decreased over 100 pounds per person per year in the last 100 years. Prior to the 1900s, the average person ate 225 pounds per person per year of wheat. And yet by 1970, it hit an all-time low because of what? The whole low-carb, high-protein diets that just hit the scene. And paleo, keto, all of these diets, they're just renaming the high-protein, low-carb diet, Dr. Atkins and all of those things. By 2011, the last census that I saw, the average American ate 132 pounds of wheat per year. From 225 to 132. So we're eating less wheat than we used to eat. And this is what changed, though. In the 1900s, 90% of flour was consumed and used at home. Only 10% was used commercially. 1945, it dropped to 60% used at home, 40% used commercially. By 1990, 10% of flour was used at home, 90% commercially. What does that tell you? We took bread making out of the home, just like I shared in the last episode. We let somebody take our millstone, and we've been dying ever since and getting fatter and sicker, and people are trying to figure out why. Telling you, the bread is a big key. Jesus compared himself to bread for a reason. I'm often asked, people say, how much of this bread do I need to eat? And I'm like, well, Jesus compared himself to bread. How much Jesus do you need? And they laugh. But this gentleman that I just interviewed that saw such a drastic change in 3 or 4 days. I mean, debilitating in 3 or 4 days. Or the woman that, shared. And these are just a few of the testimonies that people have shared with us, or that I think of sharing. I said, how much bread do you eat? He goes, I eat bread at every meal. Every meal. He said, breakfast, I would have a slice of bread. Lunchtime, he said, if I ate lunch, I would eat a sandwich with 2 slices of bread. At home, at dinner, whatever I ate, I ate bread with it. And I just think we need to be eating more bread, not less. And, throughout history, and even today, most of the world lives off of grains and beans. Very little meat. I mean, when I go to Haiti, they eat rice, and as my husband says, they eat rice and beans for breakfast and beans and rice for lunch, or for dinner. They eat 2 meals a day. So it's grains and beans, grains and beans. Every culture has bread throughout history. And when bread was rationed or stripped of its nutrients, that's when people started getting sick.
Yeah. A couple of things there. So I think also to coincide with the fact that people, stopped milling their own wheat or getting freshly milled wheat and baking bread. Also in the early 1900s, we saw the introduction and the rise of processed seed oils. So I think that's very problematic, your vegetable oil, canola oil, all these things. And I think those two things have probably been the most impactful in a negative way on health. And so some people are probably listening because I do love me a high protein diet, Sue, I have to say. But here's what I have often thought.
Oh, no, I do too. I love meat. Oh, no, don't get me wrong. Yes.
But but I've thought I've shared this with my membership group, the Christian Health Club, and I've talked about this, because I do recommend people eat a lot of meat to get protein. But I think biblical people ate as much protein as I recommend? No, I don't. But I think that they were able to get a lot of the protein from the bread, from their wheat bread. Like you said, it's got all of the amino acids except for lysine. And I think, most definitely they had a different composition of gut bacteria back then. I think their digestive systems were not burdened with all the things that we have today. They would have been able to process, extract proteins, use amino acids so much more efficiently than we do today. And I really think that has a lot to do with it. And so I think, if we lived in biblical times, no, we would not be eating as much meat as maybe I do today or recommend. But I think, that is why. Here's the other thing that surprised me. I was really nervous about eating the bread and wheat because I tend towards constipation. That was one of my, talk about clogging me up. And so I was really worried that was going to be an issue, and it wasn't. It wasn't at all. But if I eat a big plate of vegetables, it constipates me, which I think is interesting. And another thing I tell people is I don't think biblical people were eating ginormous salads. They weren't having big plates of Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. They didn't have the availability of, any fruit or any vegetable at any time of the year like we do today, right? They ate regionally, seasonally, what was available. If there was fruit available, that's what would they have had. But the bread would have been a mainstay of their meal. It would have provided the fiber and a lot of this nutrition. And so I think, people don't think about it that way.
Right. When Abraham fed the angels, when they came to tell him that Sarah would have a baby, he said, quick, kill the calf, make some bread. And he fed him yogurt and bread and meat. And I think you're absolutely correct there. In fact, in America, I just shared with you how much our grain consumption has gone down. Meat consumption is actually up by 47 pounds per person per year. Sugar up 52 pounds per person per year. So I absolutely agree. When they sent reinforcements to David's army of men in the Bible, it was bread, so many loaves of bread, so many bushels of grain and cheese. They had milk, cheese, yogurt, bread. That was their mainstay. And meat was there, but I agree. That's why I started questioning all this. I'm like, around the world, other countries don't eat meat like we do. And I agree. I do like my meat. Not as much as you're young, I can tell. I'm older and grandma, and I don't need, I'm not building the muscle that I used to. I don't need quite as much protein as I used to. I do enjoy my meat, but I know what I wanted to tell you. One more story, or another story of a testimony. A fellow would come to my seminars when I used to speak a lot more out in churches and things like that. And he had heard of me, and he came, and he was from Ethiopia, and he and his wife both were from Ethiopia, and they did not like the American bread, so they just didn't eat it. And he came up to me after my talk on constipation, and I explained everything, and he said, my wife is a vegetarian. She eats all fruits and vegetables, but she's constipated. And he said, do you think this bread will help? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Well, he heard me speak that night, got a mill and got grain and got started. Well, then my kids started calling him my groupie. He started going kind of everywhere I would speak around the area locally. And within a month, he sent me his blood work that his cholesterol had dropped 99 points in a month. But also he came up to me and he said, my wife's constipation totally gone. She can now go to the bathroom. And she was eating fruits and vegetables. So I thought that was interesting that you mentioned that if you eat a plate of vegetables, it just doesn't have the insoluble fiber to absorb the water in our bowels, bulk up our stool, and help us eliminate like we're supposed to. The fruits and vegetables have soluble fiber, which helps soften our stools, but it doesn't help us with the bulking up, the swelling of the fecal material, putting pressure on the walls of our colon and stimulating our colon to eliminate. That's how grain fiber affects our constipation, and it's critical. It's just hard to get that without having grains as a mainstay of your diet.
And I've never been against grains. I think that properly preparing them, that's where, I was really trained with Weston A. Price is kind of, one of the people that we would follow. And just that, how ancient cultures just, they ate grains, they ate meat, they ate vegetables, they ate fruit, grains, they ate all these things, but they properly prepared the grains. So, soaking your beans, soaking your oats, all of these things, helping kind of break down some of those digestive kind of blockers and those kinds of things that create problems. And we've gotten away from that. It's just kind of like with the wheat, we skip steps. We're skipping steps. It's all convenient. We've changed about the grains and the way that we prepare them, and not so much that it's just the grains, but there's a lot of things, again, our bodies are very compromised in the way that we can break things down. There's a lot of work to be done there as well. But as you said, I think it's pretty fascinating that somebody could have all these issues and then make this bread and it really be such a game changer.
Changes. Yeah. Yes, that's been so encouraging to me. And like I said, I just continue to study. I learn something new just about every day because I read so much and study so much. And when someone tells me the bread helped this, I study it. And I'm like, how is that possible? And it's just been a really, really exciting journey, and one that just keeps me going because I know it's real. And the whole myth about, if I eat this bread, it's going to make me fat. Nope. Studies over time have shown that people that eat more whole grains are 49% less likely to be overweight than people who don't eat or eat less whole grains. So, that's, again, eating it real. Does the stuff in the store make you overweight? Yes, I believe that's part of the obesity crisis that we're seeing in our country. When food is, and bread was the first thing taken out of their home, one of the first commercially processed foods. And now we've been at it more than 100 years now, about 120 years. And like you said, then the oils, then the fruits and vegetables, then the juice, then the milk, then the this, then the that. And now what we're offered up in the store is just devoid of what God put there and intended to give our bodies the nutrients that we need.
Yeah, it's a far cry from real food the way God made it. One thing I always say about dairy is, God did not make cows with low-fat udders. We should not be...
No, or pasteurized milk. Yeah.
Right.
And, and in Isaiah 7, I think it's 7:14, maybe 15, I can't remember now, and I don't have the, it says, it's a prophecy about Jesus, and it says, curds and honey did he eat until he could distinguish between good and evil. And curds are yogurt. And I always laugh, and I said, he didn't like unsweetened yogurt either. He ate it with honey because honey is nourishing, not the processed pasteurized stuff you buy in the store, but it's nourishing to our body. And you know what a lot of people don't realize is fruits and vegetables and even honey have amino acids, the building blocks of protein. No, they may not be a complete protein, but they still give us amino acids. So you're exactly right was by saying we can get these amino acids and the protein we need from grains and beans. Grains and beans together make a complete protein. And who knew? You think south of the border, Latin American countries, they know that beans and cornbread make a complete protein, or in other countries, rice and beans make a complete protein. So, throughout history, we've seen that. We've seen that so much.
Yeah. I would love for you to share, I don't know, this is going way back to, you mentioned it in the first episode, but I've heard you speak about it, is the wart thing. I do want you to share about the wart story.
So before bread, that's my timetable, before bread and after bread. So before bread, my oldest daughter started getting warts. She was about 3 years old, and I took her to the doctor because, I never had warts in my family. But anyway, so I took her to the doctor, and he said, don't worry about it. Warts are a manifestation of a viral infection. They're caused by a virus. They'll run its course and go away. Well, 2 years go by. She still has the warts. They've now spread all over, and she has a large one on her heel. To make this whole 6 months or so journey short, we go to the doctor. He sends us to a specialist. I fully intended we were going to go in that doctor's office and come out without the warts. And, but no, he sent me home with remedies and a little acid that we were to drop on the warts that burned her little 5-year-old skin. So that didn't work. And anyway, long process of going back and forth to the doctor, still had warts, multiple tries of getting this stuff, medicine on there to get rid of the warts. Finally, he's like, well, we'll just have to burn them off or take them off. But she's so distraught and scared that we're going to put her to sleep. And I'm like, yeah, we're not going to do that today. I'm going home. Well, in this interim, my 3-year-old son, her younger brother, started getting warts too, because the virus is contagious. And so he started getting warts. Well, I'll never forget, on that drive home that day, I remembered a sentence. I just saw it in my mind. Sentence in a book that I had read. Actually, it was one of Adele Davis's books on vitamin E. And it said, vitamin E has been known to get rid of warts. So I came home and I was like, I had vitamin E, because I had begun taking vitamin E for female issues, because prior to having children, I never had monthly cycles. And I had read in Adele Davis's book that probably needed vitamin E, and I started having monthly cycles, and then I could get pregnant. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But make a long story short, I had vitamin E because I took it all the time. Came home, started giving my daughter and my son vitamin E, and within 2 weeks, I think it was, my son's warts were gone because he had just started getting them. It took about 3 or 4 weeks for Ashley's, my oldest daughter's, to go away, but they went completely away with vitamin E supplements. So time goes on. My third child was born. He began to get warts around 3 years old. I haven't figured out the 3-year-old thing or where they were getting them. Anyway, so I was like, fine, I know what to do. Give him vitamin E supplements. Well, he could not swallow the capsule. I don't know why, because they're little tiny gelatin capsules. I'm like, Joshua, just swallow the thing. And he couldn't. Well, by the time Joshua was 3, I had 2 younger children. I had 3 children in 3 years there. So warts weren't huge on my priority list. And this was before bread. But Joshua turned 5, so 2 years go by. Warts all over his hand. One about to push his fingernail off. It had gotten so big. This is when the bread came into our home. The mill came into our home. And I began to mill our own wheat and make all of our own bread. And I learned that wheat is the richest food source of vitamin E, but only when it's freshly milled and doesn't have the germs stripped away. So I didn't really, again, think that much about it. But some point in that month, I looked down at Joshua's hands and his wart was all gone. So I knew it was the bread, the richest food source of vitamin E, because I had seen what vitamin E did. So I pulled out my biochemistry books and I'm like, how does vitamin E do this? And I learned that vitamin E protects the integrity of every cell in our body. It keeps free radicals and oxidation from breaking down like I said, the integrity of our cell membranes, if you want to call them that. And a virus, the way it works is when it invades your body, the only way it can reproduce, unlike bacteria that can just reproduce on their own, virus has to invade your cell and use your cell's genetic makeup to reproduce. So when the integrity of our cells are weakened because of a lack of vitamin E and oxidation can take place more readily, we're more susceptible to invasion of viruses. And this is why I think, one of the reasons I think we saw less colds and flus and sickness over the years, but also why I believe my son's warts went away is because he was now fighting that virus and it could no longer invade his cells. So it was funny. I began to share and teach, that this was one of my testimonies when I spoke. I'm like, constipation gone, sugar cravings gone, sinus congestion gone, and one of my kids' warts went away. And so I began to teach this and share this. The next thing I know, we have hundreds of wart stories. And some people laughed at me and were like, that sounds so hokey. But I studied it and saw how physiologically, biochemically it works. It's protecting the integrity of every cell in our body and keeping us and making us less susceptible to viral invasion. And one of the most exciting testimonies, and there's a couple I could share here, but in the early days, like I said, I shared my wart stories, and somebody came up to me one time and he said, you really shouldn't share that wart stuff. Your other stuff is pretty scientific, but I wouldn't share the wart story. It kind of blows your credibility. So I was speaking at an event in Nashville, Tennessee, and my workshop was going to start in about 15 minutes. And I decided, okay, I'm not going to share the wart stuff if that blows my credibility scientifically. But 15 minutes before I was to go in, a woman walks up to my booth that had heard me speak the year before, had taken a CD that we had offered or a recording of the workshop home to her husband. And she said, I'm here to tell you, my husband's a medical doctor. He listened to your workshop and he just wanted me to tell you that everything you're sharing is scientifically and medically correct. And it would have had the wart story on it because that was before I decided not to share. And she said, but I have a message that I want to share for you. She goes, my very best friend came to me, had a huge wart on her thumb, and gone to doctor after doctor to no avail, couldn't get rid of the wart. And just as a friend, they basically just said, just live with it. And I can't even imagine what the wart was like. She said, Sue, it was almost like a second appendage. It was so large on her thumb. And as a friend, she asked my husband, and he said, I don't know what to tell you, live with the wart. Well, she said, I had just baked bread that day. And so I looked at my friend and I said, well, I heard this lady speak how this bread got rid of her kids' warts and other people's warts. And she goes, hey, you can have my bread. And I always laugh and said, well, who would turn down, a homemade loaf of bread? And so she said, Sue, she took the bread home and called me ecstatic. Before she finished the first loaf of bread, the wart was going away. And by the time she finished the second loaf of bread, the wart was completely gone. I went in my workshop and I told my wart story, and I continue to tell it to this day. I was speaking at another event in Richmond, Virginia. At these events, it's a workshop. You're only given 45 minutes to share 6 hours worth of information. So I have to talk very quickly and kind of pray and decide what I'm going to share. Well, that day I almost skipped the wart story, but I just stopped and I decided, nope, I'm going to share the wart story. I condensed it so it was short. And finished my talk, and actually for the first time ever finished my talk with a few minutes to spare. Usually I'm running over and trying to get out of there to make room for the next speaker. And but I finished a few minutes early, just kind of came to a stopping point. And I did something I've never done before. I asked if people had any questions or anything they wanted to share. 2 people shared their wart stories with me. I packed up my stuff and walked out of the room, and there was a mom standing outside the door waiting for me. She was walking past my workshop to go to another workshop, and she said the Lord told her to go into my room. She said she had no idea what my message was about. And she said, but God sent me there. She said, my 17-year-old daughter has over 500 warts. She's had them since she was 12. We burned them all off at one point. They all came back, right? Because it's a virus. You just got rid of the symptom. And she said she's been on all kinds of medication. They currently have her on ulcer medication, thinking maybe it's stress related. And she said, I know God sent me in this room to hear your story. And she said, because I've been praying, God, send me an answer. She followed me back to our booth. It was at a convention and where we were making bread and sharing samples. She tasted the bread and she said, how much is the meal? At that time, it was $250. This was a number of years ago. And she said, you know what? I've paid more than that for one prescription medication that didn't work and no one in our family could eat. So she said, I like to cook. We have to eat. What have I got to lose? What have I got to lose? She purchased the mill and everything she needed to begin making her bread. She called me in 2.5 weeks. She said at 2 weeks of eating the bread, her daughter started itching and screaming, going, Mom, what have you done to me now? But in 2.5 weeks, every wart on that child's body was gone. 2.5 weeks. And, you know, when I hear these stories, first it was like, oh, that's great. Warts are gone. But then it hit me a few years ago. If this bread, the richest food source of vitamin E needed by every cell of our body, can protect us from a virus that causes warts that we've had for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, who knows how long, what other viruses can it protect us from? And this, I think, is very critical information in the time that we're living in. Doesn't mean that you'll never, ever get sick, but it should mean that you're protected more readily and can fight these viruses better. And so in that way, it also helps your immune system by just protecting the integrity of every cell in your body from being more susceptible to the invasion of virus. So that's my wart story. And I tell you, we have hundreds. It is probably the number one testimony we hear, but 500 warts that she had for over 5 years in 2.5 weeks. That's amazing. And it's more than just an ugly manifestation on your skin. It is a virus. And God's perfect provision, it never ceases to amaze me.
That is amazing. And I'm 100% catching your drift on.
Yeah.
On that.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes, I do. Oh my gosh. Well, Sue, I really could keep you here all day, talking to you. But the wonderful news is that you do have, a lot of YouTube videos. I know, cause I binged on all of them. So, you have a lot of YouTube videos that people can turn to hear more and just to hear more of these stories, more fleshed out, more information. But before I let you go, could you just give us a little bit of insight on, somebody's hearing this and like, okay, I'm going to go for it. So like, how does somebody get started? Yeah. What do they need to do?
Yeah. Well, your grain mill is going to be the number one appliance that you'll ever purchase in your whole life. That's the most important. I love the Wonder Mill. That's the main one we sell. It's the one I've used for 25 years. It's just a workhorse. It's clean. It's easy. Turn it on, pour the grain in, comes out flour. It cleans itself. It's just super, super easy to use. And a grain mill is your first place to start. You want to change the health of your family, get a grain mill. I love an electric mill. I'm going to use my electric mill as long as we have electricity available. So I know some people kind of opt for hand mills, but they're a little more tedious. And in our busy lifestyle, electric grain mill is number one. Hard wheat is what you want for yeast breads. We do have varieties, hard red and hard white. Red's more flavorful and does seem to have more fiber, a little more cleansing. So if bowel issues are your main issue, then you probably want to focus mostly on hard red, but there's places where I love hard white. Most of my bread, I do a mixture of, actually my favorite mixture right now is hard red, hard white, spelt. I do love the ancient grain, spelt, kamut. We do have einkorn at Bread Becker's, which you can get all of these online, breadbeckers.com. But most of my bread, I just gravitate towards the hard red and the hard white. And like I said, spelt. I love Ezekiel mix. We do sell an Ezekiel mixture of grains and beans, wheat, spelt, barley, millet, lentils, and beans that I use a lot for my muffins, my pancakes, because I am wanting to make sure we get the complete proteins that we need, amino acids that we need. So I love that. Of course, mixers make it so much more doable in our busy lifestyles. So I do love a bread machine. There's places for it, though. In my large family, I didn't use the bread machine as much as I did my Ankish room mixer that could mix up dough in 5 minutes. And, yes, I had to take it out and shape it and let it rise on my counter. But hands-on time was 15, 20 minutes or less. And I could make 6 loaves of bread at a time and do some filled breads, hamburger buns, whatever. So those are great things. Of course, wheat and honey and yeast, and we use Redmond real salt. So those are lists of the basic items that you need. We do have a video on YouTube called The Basic List of Getting Started Items on our Bread Becker's YouTube channel. So that will help most people, but really, quick breads, muffins, pancakes, you don't need a machine other than your grain mill and a wire whisk and a bowl. So those are easy places to start. Most people can whip up a batch of muffins. You just said you made some muffins, right? Mix them up 5 minutes. They bake in 15, 20, and in less than 30 minutes, you have real bread on the table. And you know what? Grains can always be boiled and eaten whole. I think we've forgotten that as Americans. Mediterranean diet, they eat a lot of whole grains, boiled, and chop up some onions and peppers and put a dash of oil and vinegar, your favorite ones, on there. And you've got a delicious whole grain salad. So bread doesn't always have to be a loaf of sliced bread. It can be a bowl of oatmeal. It can be grits and rice and beans and cream of wheat and, a whole boiled grain salad, whatever you want to make it. So make it fit your lifestyle. But I highly recommend going to our website like you did and looking at some of our YouTube channels. And please go watch the Real Bread, the Staff of Life video. I know we've been talking a lot and shared a lot of information, but it goes way further than we even were able to get to today because of just my years of studying and just being amazed at God's perfect provision. So, and then, hey, check out my podcast, Sue's Healthy Minutes, on any podcast platform that you listen to, or you can even listen to it on our website, Bread Becker's. But those should get you started. My cookbook, the Essential Homegrown Flour book, is great. Or we have a little red one that I put together in the early days that we print out at our store and sell it. It's called the Recipe Collection. So those are great places for you to start and just learn and just jump in, just do it. If you know there's a room in your house called a kitchen, it's easy.
Yes, I'll say I got the mill and I ordered einkorn and spelt, and then the hard white, I think, is what I have. Mm-hmm. And just kind of played with a different combination of those. And I already had a bread machine. And that's, it takes literally like 30 seconds to grind the wheat. And then I literally, dump it in the bread machine with the other ingredients. And 3 hours later, it's done. My prep part is less than 5 minutes.
Yes.
So
exactly.
it is not hard. And, anyway, we'll put all these links and all these great things in the show notes as well. So people can, have it all in one place to find you. But yeah, you can find Sue at all her website, YouTube, her podcast, all great stuff. And I do recommend listening to that, The Staff of Life. I think that's the very first one that my former client sent to me and was like, check this out. Yeah. And now here we are.
Here we are. And it's exciting. We've been at this now this is our 31 years in business. And it's because it's real. It's not a gimmick. It's not a magic bullet that's going to fix you tomorrow, but it is pretty amazing. You will poop tomorrow. But anyway, that's what I'm afraid so many people are looking for is a pill or something. But we need to come back to the basics. And this is life-changing. And how we've been in business 30 years and keep growing and keep going is because it changes people's lives for real. And they bring a friend and they tell a friend, when your warts go away, 500 of them in 2.5 weeks, or your cholesterol drops 100 points in a month, or you just feel better, your irritable bowel and all of that, you have your life back, you're going to tell somebody. So I have a slogan called spread the bread.
Yeah.
Tell somebody about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's what
the real bread of life and the real bread of life.
That is right. That is right. That's what we're doing here. Well, we've talked about a lot of Bible verses today, but I always ask all my guests 2 things at the very end: their anchor meal and their anchor verse. Just your go-to healthy meal. Might know what that is for you, and then your go-to scripture verse. So if you could share those things before we go, that'd be great.
Yeah. I have shared a lot of verses, and there's several, that I've shared. Isaiah 55 verse 2, of course, why do you spend your money for that which is not bread? But my go-to meal, oh my goodness. My favorite is, I have so many. Actually, my meals are always based around bread. It's like, I tell people I'm a moody eater. So if I want cornbread, well, then I'm going to probably have chili and cornbread. But if I want biscuits, I'm going to have breakfast for dinner. So, but I just love a warm slice of bread. Like this morning, I had a cup of my hot chocolate that I make with raw cacao and my raw milk and sweetened with honey and a little cayenne pepper and a slice of toasted Ezekiel bread. And that was just warm and satisfying and comforting. And, John 6:35, Jesus says, I am the real bread of life. He who comes to me shall be satisfied. This bread will satisfy you and nourish you. And that's what Jesus knew. And the people he was talking to of the day would have known that. And so I guess that's kind of my favorite meal and one of my favorite verses all wrapped into one.
And that is a beautiful way to close down our time together. Sue, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure, such an honor to have you here. And I really do encourage everybody to go check out Sue's information and, try it out for yourself. One thing I will say that I thought was so interesting is when I made the bread, I was emotional. Right before I ate it, I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I have been gluten-free for all this time. And it was hard for me to, it was kind of hard for me to do, so I just say that because, for a lot of us who have been, and that's just part of what we have done for so long, it's different. It's different to do. And so it was, I told my husband, I feel like I'm going to cry. It was,
I know,
and it, but we have to be open to these things, open to trying. And like I said, so far, it's been just a real delight for us. It's worked out wonderfully. So I encourage you to give it a try. But thanks again, Sue.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've really just let me share my heart and my soul and, what God has shown me. And, most people, I think, are battling with health issues. And Exodus 23:25 says, God says, if you'll obey me, I will bless your bread and I will bless your water and I will take sickness from the midst of you. That's a powerful promise from God's word. So I pray a blessing on every listener today that God would bless your bread and bless your water and help resolve some of these health issues that you're facing.
Sue's Healthy Minutes podcast has been a presentation by the Breadbeckers Incorporated located in Woodstock, Georgia. For more information, store hours, and learning opportunities, visit breadbeckers.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Share this with 2 friends who would benefit from this information, and be sure to join us again next week for more of Sue's Healthy Minutes.